Chapter 1, Ashes and Ashtrays. The room smelled faintly of burnt toast and stale tobacco, not because anyone had smoked there recently, but because the carpet and the drapes had absorbed years of forgettable moments. Ravi sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, a weathered cigarette case in his hand, empty. He hadn't smoked in 9 months, but he couldn't bring himself to throw the case away. It was one of the few things that hadn't left him. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall opposite him. He glanced at his reflection, then away. The person staring back looked decent enough, short hair, trimmed beard, even a clean shirt, but there was something in the eyes. Something that hadn't been cleaned up. He reached for the shoebox beneath his bed. It was covered in dust, as if even time had given up on it. Inside were relics of old decisions. A court summons from 4 years ago, a tarnished keychain from a job he never kept, and a folded cruise brochure with a sun-faded corner. Ocean wind, 3 days of bliss. The slogan felt almost like a dare. Ravi hadn't taken a vacation in years, partly because he couldn't afford to, mostly because he hadn't felt he deserved one. But something about the idea of floating out into the ocean, away from headlines, landlords, job interviews, and eyes that knew too much, it lingered. He leaned back on his palms and stared at the ceiling. A water stain above the ceiling fan had grown larger, resembling something vaguely like a woman dancing or drowning, he couldn't decide which. The knock at the door startled him. 3 quick raps, then silence. Probably Mrs. Malhotra from 4B, asking about the leaking pipe again. But when he opened the door, no one was there. Just a folded envelope on the mat. Ravi Sharma, final notice. He sighed. Not angry. Not surprised. Just, confirmed. The world wasn't waiting for him to turn his life around. It had made up its mind already. He went back inside, poured himself a glass of water, then tossed it back like a shot of something stronger. Then, without ceremony, he took the brochure, smoothed it against his knee, and booked the cruise online with shaking fingers and borrowed money. He didn't pack that night. He just sat on the floor, looking at the suitcase as if it might walk away. When dawn broke through the stained blinds, Ravi was still awake. Not reborn. Not hopeful. Just, ready. Chapter 2, The Sea Between Us. The port was humming, with rolling suitcases, loudspeakers, awkward hugs, and sunscreen already applied too generously. Families posed for selfies. Couples bickered over misplaced passports. Children clung to stuffed animals like life vests. Ravi stood still in the chaos, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a canvas-bound journal under the other arm, unused, unopened, gifted by someone who no longer sent gifts. The ocean wind loomed above him, impossibly large, almost smug in its polish. White decks gleamed under the sun like teeth, and flags fluttered with an ease he envied. As he walked up the gangway, no one welcomed him with confetti or smiles. That was fine. He wasn't there to be celebrated. He reached his cabin, modest, windowless, tucked in the lower levels like a thought you don't want to finish. The bed was made. The mirror was clean. The silence was perfect. Ravi didn't unpack. He left the bag by the chair and stepped out, navigating the ship like someone learning to walk again. Every surface was too clean, too bright. Too curated. It felt like pretending to be alive. On the upper deck, the sea stretched out like a lie too big to catch. The wind slapped his face in steady rhythm. He leaned on the railing and let it hit him. Maybe the salt would disinfect more than his skin. That's when he saw her. She was sitting by herself at the edge of a row of lounge chairs, reading a book she wasn't turning the pages of. She wasn't dressed like the others, no big sunglasses, no loud prints, no hat. Just a pale blue dress that moved when the wind wanted it to. Their eyes didn't meet. Not yet. But Ravi noticed her, and he noticed the kind of quiet that clung to her, familiar, heavy, but dignified. Not loneliness exactly, but something adjacent. He turned away. He didn't want to invent stories about strangers. Instead, he walked the decks. From the casino to the spa to the overpriced souvenir store with anchor-shaped keychains. He bought none of them. But in the reflection of the glass, he saw the same woman again, walking slowly past, looking for nothing in particular. At dinner, Ravi sat alone at the end of a long table set for 8. He ordered a mild curry and a soda. 2 seats down, a couple laughed too loudly about a cocktail with 7 layers. Across the hall, he saw her again, at a corner table, reading during dinner, barely touching her food. A waiter approached her and said something. She nodded politely, smiled just enough, and returned to her book. It was only on his way out that their eyes met for the first time. Just a second. But something in it felt mutual. Recognition, perhaps. Or resignation. 2 ghosts nodding at each other, passing on a ship that had no idea it carried more than luggage. Chapter 3, Glass Walls. The next morning, the sun came dressed like a cliché, golden, overconfident, and far too optimistic for Ravi's taste. He wandered into the small reading lounge, a glass-enclosed corner on deck 7. Inside, the air smelled of new paper and artificial citrus. Rows of books with uncracked spines lined the walls. No one else was there, at least, not at first. He picked out a thin paperback about shipwrecks. Fitting. Halfway through a passage about bodies never recovered, the door creaked open. She entered, the woman from before. Same pale blue dress, but today with a cream-colored shawl that looked borrowed from a gentler season. She scanned the shelves like someone searching for something she didn't expect to find. Ravi kept his eyes on the book. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just breathed a little slower. She chose a book, something by Rilke, he thought, and sat 3 chairs away. Close enough for tension, far enough for decency. Minutes passed. Maybe 10. Maybe 30. Then she spoke. Do you always read books with tragic endings? Her voice wasn't soft. It was precise, like a violin tuned not to charm but to be heard clearly in silence. Ravi looked up. I think they're more honest, he said. Happy endings lie by omission. She closed her book gently. That's a sad way to live. It's not sad, he replied. It's manageable. She looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. I'm Aisha, she said. Ravi. They shook hands briefly, like 2 diplomats negotiating a truce in exile. Later that day, they crossed paths again on the observation deck. This time, she was the one already leaning against the railing, staring at the place where sea meets sky and neither apologizes for being unreachable. Ravi stood beside her without asking. Do you travel often? He asked. Not really, she replied. This is my first time on water. I thought it would feel freeing. And does it? No, she said. It feels quiet. But not peaceful. Like a church that's been emptied too long. He nodded. The simile made more sense to him than he wanted to admit. There was a pause, comfortable, uncertain, layered. Then she added, almost as an afterthought. I don't like being looked at. But I also hate feeling invisible. Funny how the 2 things can coexist. Ravi didn't answer. He didn't know how to. He just stood there, watching the light stretch across the waves. For the rest of that day, they drifted in and out of proximity, not seeking each other out, but not avoiding it either. There was no romance in it. No flirtation. Just the strange relief of being near someone who wasn't demanding anything. 2 people, temporarily alive in the same silence. Chapter 4, A Windless Night. The second night on the ship was still. Too still. The wind that had tousled clothes and played with shawls during the day had disappeared, leaving the decks oddly quiet, like a stage just before the curtains rise. The sea rolled gently beneath, its voice hushed to a whisper. The moon hung large and swollen in the sky, casting silver across every surface it touched. Ravi hadn't meant to go out again. He had told himself he would try sleeping early, maybe even write something in that untouched journal. But his body, guided more by unease than intention, took him up to deck 11 instead, the farthest point from the noise of evening shows and karaoke echoes. There was no one there. Or so he thought. Aisha was already sitting on the deck's edge bench, her silhouette outlined in moonlight, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had probably long gone cold. She didn't startle when he approached. Didn't even look up. It was as if she had expected him. "I think the ship's holding its breath," she said. Ravi sat next to her, careful to leave space, but not too much. "Maybe it's afraid of waking something beneath." A faint smile crossed her lips, then disappeared. They watched the sea for a long time. From somewhere far off, the faint hum of a piano drifted upward, someone playing something slow and unsure in one of the lounges below. "You ever feel like you're just watching your life from the outside?" she asked. "Sometimes," Ravi said. "Feels like someone else wrote the script, and I came late to the rehearsal." Aisha tilted her head. "Do you believe in fate?" He thought about that. Only in hindsight. She sipped from her cup, grimaced. "Cold. I could get another one." "No," she interrupted softly. "Let it be." There was silence again. The good kind. Not empty, just deep. Then she said, "I used to think that if I stood still long enough, maybe life would pass me by. Like standing on a platform and letting every train go. And now? Now I wonder if I ever boarded anything at all." Her voice was even. Not dramatic. But Ravi felt something crack open in the space between them. He didn't know what it was, not yet, but it was heavy, and it didn't need to be explained. He looked up at the moon. "It's too bright," he said. "Like it's pretending not to be alone." Aisha laughed, a soft, surprised sound. "That's exactly how it feels." She stood then, brushing invisible dust off her dress. "I'm tired," she said. "Of everything." Ravi stood too, not knowing what to say. "Will I see you tomorrow?" She looked at him, long enough to make him uneasy, not long enough to offer comfort. "Maybe," she said. "If we both don't drift away by then." And with that, she walked off, slowly, deliberately, disappearing into the quiet corridors of the ship. Ravi stayed there a while longer, staring at the moon, not realizing how cold his hands had gotten. Chapter 5, The Fall. The final night arrived with little fanfare. There were fireworks on the main deck. Laughter spilling from the casino. Children high on sugar, parents high on relief. Cameras flashing to preserve the illusion of joy. Ravi didn't attend any of it. Instead, he wandered the corridors until the noise became a distant vibration, a pulse trapped behind glass and steel. He climbed the narrow stairwell to the outermost deck, the one no one visited unless they were avoiding something. Or someone. Above, the moon was full again. Too bright. Too still. It stared down with a blankness that mocked emotion. He leaned against the railing, both hands gripping the cold steel. The sea below looked like oil, black, thick, silent. He closed his eyes and listened, not to the ocean, but to the sound of his own breathing. For a moment, it almost resembled peace. Then a voice behind him broke it. Couldn't sleep either. He turned. Aisha. Same dress. No shawl this time. Her hair slightly windblown. She held a half-empty glass, something amber, maybe whiskey. "I didn't think anyone came up here," he said. "Exactly why I did." She joined him at the railing, just a few feet away. Close enough to share moonlight. Not close enough to touch. They stood in silence. The sea whispered below them, indifferent as always. I hate endings, she said suddenly. They pretend to offer closure, but all they do is echo. Ravi glanced at her. Her expression was unreadable, calm, composed, but her fingers clutched the glass a little too tightly. Not all endings are bad, he offered. No, she said. Some are necessary. A pause. Then she asked, very softly, do you think people ever really change? Ravi looked back out at the ocean. I hope so. Otherwise, I'm wasting a lot of effort. She smiled faintly, but her eyes remained somewhere far away. I envy you, she whispered. That startled him. Me? Why? Because you still believe there's something to fight for. He didn't know how to respond. So he looked up at the moon again, the same one they had spoken about before. It really is too bright, he said, trying to recapture that earlier moment. That's when he heard it. A sudden gasp, a sharp intake of breath, and the sound of a glass hitting metal, shattering. He turned. She was falling. For a frozen second, time moved like syrup. Her hand reached out, grazed his wrist, her fingernails digging in reflexively. He grabbed for her, missed, felt the scratch tear across his skin, and then she was gone. A splash. Then silence. He screamed. He screamed so loud it tore the stillness into ribbons. He shouted for help, again and again, voice raw, throat burning. Footsteps thundered up the stairwell. Lights flooded the deck. Sirens began to wail. The search started within minutes. It took hours. By dawn, they found her body, bloated slightly from the salt but still intact. Her eyes were closed. Her arms floated gently outward, like wings that had failed to open. Ravi stood handcuffed on the side, blood drying on his hand, salt stinging his eyes. He looked at her one last time before they took him below. No one said a word. But their eyes screamed everything. Chapter 6, The Silent Screams. There are moments when the world turns cold, not because of weather, but because of the way people look at you. When Ravi was escorted down to the security cabin, dripping, shivering, and stunned, he was still trying to form a sentence. Not a defense, just a thought, a statement, any coherent thread of reality that could explain what had just happened. But no one wanted words. They wanted certainty. 2 cruise security officers stood outside the door as he sat, alone, under a flickering ceiling light. A medic had bandaged the scratch on his wrist, a red welt that looked too much like a fight, too little like an accident. A crew member entered with a tablet. He placed it on the table without sitting. There's no surveillance footage of the forward deck, he said. That part's under renovation. Cameras were taken down a week ago. Ravi blinked. So, there's no video? No proof? The man's eyes were flat. No direct proof. But plenty of speculation. By the time the ship docked, the storm had already begun. A "missing woman on cruise" tweet from a passenger with 12K followers had gone viral. A photo from the second night, Ravi and Aisha standing side by side on deck 9, was already making rounds with the caption. He was the last one seen with her. Hours later, she fell. The air quotes did more damage than the truth ever could. Local police boarded the cruise. Ravi was escorted down the gangway under the gaze of news cameras. Somewhere, someone yelled "murderer," but it came out like a whisper coated in venom. Detectives questioned him at the station. Again. And again. What were you doing on that deck? We were talking. About what? I don't remember everything. Did she jump? I think so. I mean, yes. She leaned too far. But she scratched you. I tried to catch her. Pause. You've been arrested before, Mr. Sharma? Yes. Years ago. It was petty theft. You're not exactly a model citizen. That was the moment Ravi realized what this was going to be. Not an investigation. A narrative. And he was already written in as the villain. 2 days later, the headline spread across every platform. Dead girl on deck, cruise ends in tragedy. Ex-convict linked to passenger death. Mysterious fall or murder at sea. His face was everywhere, not the one he saw in the mirror, but the one from the mugshot 8 years ago. His eyes half closed. His mouth slightly open. Caught mid-blink. Midlife. The worst part wasn't the accusation. It was the doubt. Even people who knew him, co-workers, neighbors, began to distance themselves. He was always quiet. You never know with quiet ones. Didn't he have a record? That says something. Maybe she said no to him. It didn't matter that there were no bruises on her body. It didn't matter that he'd called for help instantly. It didn't matter that there were no screams, no evidence of a struggle. What mattered was that she was beautiful, young, and dead. And he was not. Bail was set. He paid it with a loan from someone who refused to meet him in person. Back at his apartment, the leak still stained the ceiling, and the air smelled of rot and abandonment. But this time, the silence wasn't peaceful. It accused. Ravi stared at the blank journal lying on his table. The one he had taken on the cruise, untouched. He picked up a pen. And for the first time in weeks, he wrote just one sentence. If I ever believed in justice, that belief was buried at sea. Chapter 7, Drowning on Land. If water had taken Aisha, fire had claimed Ravi. Not literal fire, but the slow, spreading burn of accusation, suspicion, and silence that followed him everywhere. He returned to a life he no longer recognized. The neighborhood store, where he once bought eggs and borrowed conversations, now greeted him with silence and sideways glances. Mrs. Rao, who used to ask about his job prospects, suddenly acted like she didn't know his name. Even the kids playing cricket on the street paused when he passed, like death itself had strolled by. His phone vibrated constantly, not with support, but venom. You'll rot, murderer. Just jump off a ship next time. We haven't forgotten your past. One message simply read. You killed her. Own it. The media circus didn't help. Night after night, his face was on local TV, the tone of the anchor suggesting guilt without ever needing to say it outright. The man at the center of the cruise tragedy had a criminal record. No cameras on the deck, convenient. Was this a case of obsession gone wrong? One anchor, smiling faintly, asked. What kind of woman spends time alone with a man like him? It was never just about Aisha. It was about Ravi, and how easy he was to blame. His job at the small logistics firm evaporated. The HR email was brief. Due to the circumstances surrounding the ongoing investigation, we believe it is in the company's best interest to terminate your position effective immediately. Friends stopped replying. A cousin messaged once. You should probably lay low for a while. It's not a good look, man. He read the message twice. Deleted it. Even at home, he couldn't escape. The walls had never felt close before. Now they seemed to lean in, watching. He tried to keep busy. Cooked rice. Let it burn. Tried to write. The pen trembled. Some nights, he'd stare at the empty ceiling for hours, hearing the splash again. Seeing Aisha's hand reaching. Feeling the claw of her nails tearing through his wrist. The attorney, Meera Patel, visited him once, a tired, intelligent woman who didn't look like she enjoyed ruining people's lives. She sat in his kitchen, looked around at the empty sink and unopened food packets. You still insist she jumped? She asked quietly. I don't insist, he replied. I watched it happen. She scratched you. People saw you with her all cruise. That's motive, proximity, and injury. No, he said. That's context. Not truth. She looked at him, long and hard, then stood. We're still looking, she said. But I won't lie. It's not looking good. That night, he searched the internet for Aisha. Nothing useful. Just photos scraped from her social profiles, now turned into clickbait. Mystery woman lost at sea. Who was Aisha Rahman? He looked at her smile in those pictures. Poised, distant, too perfect. Not the version of her who spoke of trains she never boarded and endings that echo. He wondered if anyone else had seen that side. Ravi stood by the window at dawn, eyes hollow, the street glowing grey-blue in the early light. No cars passed. No birds sang. And for the first time, the thought came, real and complete. Maybe this is who I am to the world now. A shadow that slipped into someone else's tragedy and stayed. Chapter 8, A Dead Girl's Echo. 3 months had passed since the fall. Ravi had stopped counting the days. They all looked the same, grey outside, quieter inside, broken only by the sound of his own breath. A kind of living coma. Then, on a Tuesday soaked in rain, his attorney called. Something came up, Mira said, her voice different this time, not weary, but careful. Later that day, Ravi met her in her office, a cramped, musty room with too many files and too little warmth. She placed a manila folder in front of him. Aisha Rahman's landlord finally got permission to clear her apartment, Mira said. He found this. Inside the folder were scanned pages, some handwritten, some typed. The first few were loose journal entries. Ravi recognized the handwriting, elegant, looping, sometimes smudged. Just like her. I walk among people like a ghost. I smile, I nod, I disappear. I thought the sea would fix me. But maybe it's just where I go to vanish for good. If I don't return, please don't blame anyone. I'm just tired of holding my breath. Ravi stared at the pages. The words didn't shock him. What shocked him was how much they sounded like the woman he met, the real one, not the one in the articles. We also recovered data from her laptop, Mira continued. Her browser history shows searches about ship railings, body recovery time, and something else. She hesitated. She wrote goodbye emails. Unsent. In her drafts folder. Ravi blinked. Unsent. Mira nodded. We think she didn't want them sent automatically. She wanted the act to be silent. Undiscovered. But not erased. Ravi exhaled, a long, slow breath, like releasing something he'd been unknowingly clutching inside. One message was addressed to no one. It read. If someone is reading this, please understand, I didn't fall. I left. And if you blame the wrong person, then you missed the point entirely. There was a man on the cruise, quiet, kind. He talked about the moon like it was listening. He didn't hurt me. He made me feel visible for 5 minutes in a world that never sees. Ravi's eyes stung. Not from relief. From grief. Because now it was real. Now it was her voice. A few days later, a therapist came forward. Aisha had stopped showing up 6 months earlier, but the counselor still had encrypted notes. Sessions revealed a deep battle with depression, dissociation, and a recurring theme. I fantasize about disappearing where no one can find me. Not for attention. For peace. Mira met Ravi again, this time not in her office, but on a park bench. She didn't bring a folder. She was unraveling, she said. And she didn't want to take anyone with her. But somehow, you still got caught in the storm. Ravi didn't respond. There was no celebration in this clarity. No vindication. Just the brittle relief of no longer being wrong. He asked quietly, will they say it? The DA's reviewing everything. I think the charges will be dropped. But will anyone say I didn't do it? Mira sighed. They might. But most people, they already stopped listening. That night, Ravi sat at his table again. The journal was still there. Still mostly blank. He opened it and wrote. A ghost cannot be proven real or innocent. Only remembered. Chapter 9, Whispers from the Deep. The case was closed in the second week of spring. No press conference. No apology. Just a single paragraph buried halfway through the local news bulletin. Following the conclusion of a comprehensive investigation, the district attorney has dropped all charges against Ravi Sharma in the death of cruise passenger Ayesha Rahman. Evidence recovered from Ms. Rahman's personal journals and digital devices indicates a voluntary act of suicide. No further action will be taken. That was it. 3 sentences. After months of headlines, speculation, panels with experts dissecting his expression frame by frame, it all ended in a whimper. No front page. No retractions. Just the finality of being forgotten. Ravi read the article twice. Then closed his laptop and didn't open it again for 3 days. Online, the tides shifted, not with regret, but with indifference. So I guess he didn't do it. Whatever. Still creepy though. That dude had a vibe. She was depressed. Doesn't mean he wasn't involved. The comments didn't sting as much anymore. They echoed in a hollow space that had already been hollowed out. He walked to a nearby cafe for the first time in months. The barista avoided eye contact. His coffee arrived lukewarm. No one said anything, but every whisper had its own weight. At the library, he found a book Ayesha had once mentioned, a Rilke collection. He ran his fingers along the pages. Folded the corner where her favorite line would have been. He didn't borrow it. Just held it. Then put it back. Some nights he still dreamed of the fall. But now, he heard more. Her voice. Not screaming, but thanking him. Sometimes she whispered. You saw me. That's more than most. Other nights, he woke with her name in his mouth and tears already drying on his cheeks. Attorney Mira called one last time. The case is over, she said. You're free. No, he said softly. I'm just, unclaimed. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, sometimes surviving feels a lot like being left behind. And that was the most honest thing anyone had said in weeks. Ravi stood by the sea the next morning. Not the cruise deck, just a quiet cliff where fishermen rarely looked up. The tide moved like breath. The horizon felt unreachable. He took out the journal again, now scuffed, water-stained, real. He wrote. The world needed a villain, so I wore the mask. The truth came too late for headlines, too early for healing. But she knows. And now, so do I. He closed the book. The wind lifted it slightly in his hand, then let it rest. Just like her. Chapter 10, Still Waters. It had been nearly a year. A year since the cruise. A year since the fall. A year since the world briefly pointed all its fingers in one direction, then quietly turned them elsewhere. Ravi now lived in a town where no one knew his name. He worked part-time at a used bookstore, where he shelved other people's words. He walked to work each day. He cooked quietly. He kept to himself. The newspaper came every Sunday, and he never read the crime section. There were no interviews. No podcasts. No memoirs titled The Man the Sea Blamed. Just days, folding into each other like pages worn thin. But once a week, always on a Thursday, he would walk to the ocean. Not to remember. Not to grieve. Just to witness. One such afternoon, the water was glass smooth. A gray sky pressed down like a secret. Ravi stood by the railing of a weather-beaten overlook. There were no tourists. Just the wind and the sound of waves brushing stone. In his coat pocket was the journal. Not quite full, but no longer empty. He opened it to the back and slipped something inside, a photo. It wasn't one of the viral ones. It was the only one he had, taken by chance by another cruise guest, later emailed to him anonymously. In it, Aisha stood beside him on deck 9, laughing. Really laughing. Her head tilted back, eyes closed, wind in her hair. Ravi wasn't looking at the camera, just at her, as if trying to memorize the moment. He sealed the journal in a plastic wrap, tied it with twine, and placed it gently in the hollow of a driftwood log near the edge. Not to bury it. Just to let it stay. Before leaving, he spoke, not loudly, not solemnly, but clearly. "I never told you thank you," he said. "Not for saving me. But for letting me be real, even if it was just for a moment." He looked up at the sky. Clouds parted slightly, revealing a patch of quiet blue. He smiled. Not because it was over. But because it would never leave him, and he could finally live with that. The sea doesn't keep secrets. It returns them. Slowly. When we're ready. The end.